My family tried to freeze me to death for my will. They forgot I'm a survival expert. There is a fundamental rule in the Alaskan bush. You do not trust your life to anything with a battery. When my stepson, Julian, handed me a brand new, top-of-the-line satellite GPS tracker for my 68th birthday, he smiled. It was a good smile. The kind of smile he used when he was trying to charm investors into his doomed nightclub ventures. Down in Anchorage, but as I took the heavy, rubberized device from his manicured hands, all I could smell was his desperation and a very distinct, metallic scent of a trap. Julian was currently $750,000 in debt to a syndicate of private lenders, who didn't use collection agencies. They used tire irons and broken glass. He drove a leased Range Rover he couldn't afford and lived in a downtown condo facing foreclosure. So, an $800 piece of survival tech wasn't a gift of love from a devoted son. It was an investment. "You're getting older, Dad," he had said, clapping my shoulder with a forced, rigid enthusiasm. "Mom would want me to make sure you're safe out there. I thought we could take a trip up to the Brooks Range next week. Just you and me. Like old times." We hadn't had old times since he was a teenager. I had raised Julian since he was 3 years old, stepping in right after his biological father vanished into the lower 48. I taught him how to shoot, how to read a topography map, how to dress a caribou in the freezing wind. But the wilderness never stuck to him. He preferred neon lights, expensive whiskey, and the illusion of easy money. Now, my wife Martha was gone, taken by pancreatic cancer 3 years ago. Her passing left a gaping hole in my chest and a $4 million estate solely in my name. The estate consisted of prime real estate near Denali, liquid assets, and a hefty life insurance policy. Upon my death, it all defaulted to Julian. I accepted the GPS. I agreed to the trip. God help me. I wanted to believe that the boy I raised was just trying to reconnect before the brutal Alaskan winter set in. I wanted to believe I was just becoming a paranoid old man. 2 nights before the bush plane was scheduled to drop us near the Anaktuvuk River, I sat at my workbench in the garage, running an oiled rag over my old .30-06 rifle. The new GPS sat on the wood, its high-definition screen dark. Something gnawed at my instincts. 40 years as a survival guide and tracker teaches you to listen to that quiet, nagging voice in the back of your skull. I picked up the device. It was rugged, waterproof, built to withstand a drop from a cliff. I pulled out my reading glasses and a precision screwdriver set. It took me 10 minutes to bypass the factory seals and pop the reinforced back casing. I am no software engineer, but I know hardware. And I know when a circuit board has been tampered with. Spliced directly into the main antenna feed was a secondary, aftermarket microtransmitter, a cheap, unauthorized piece of hardware lazily soldered to the main board. It was a GPS spoofer. My blood ran ice cold, colder than the wind howling off the glacier outside my window. I understood exactly what I was looking at, and the realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Out in the deep bush, when a wide-out blizzard hits, a man relies on his instruments to get back to base camp. If those instruments feed him a false bearing, say, 30 degrees off true north, he won't realize he's walking in a massive circle. Or worse, he won't realize he is marching straight into the sub-zero, desolate expanse of the high tundra until he freezes to death. Julian had rigged the device to lie to me. He didn't just want me to die. He wanted it to look like a tragic, unavoidable accident. An aging outdoorsman, losing his edge, wandering off into the snow. The insurance company would pay out double for accidental death. His debts would be wiped clean, and he would walk away a wealthy man. I didn't confront him. If I called the police right then, what could I prove? That a device was altered? Julian would just play dumb, blame the retailer, or say he bought it secondhand off the internet. The authorities would chalk it up to a technical malfunction. No, the wilderness is a court of its own. And I needed to see exactly how far my stepson was willing to go. I needed to look into his eyes and know for sure. I put the device back together, making sure the seals looked untouched. We flew out on a Thursday. The de Havilland Beaver float plane dropped us at a remote, winterized hunting cabin I had leased for the week. The air was razor-sharp, the sky a bruised, heavy purple. Warning of an incoming low-pressure system. A major blizzard was forecasted to hit within 48 hours. Julian was jittery. He kept checking his phone, even though there was zero cell service within 100 miles. He unpacked his pristine, brightly colored Arc'teryx gear that looked like it had never seen a speck of actual dirt. "I figured you could track that herd of elk you mentioned, Dad," Julian said, pouring himself a stiff drink from a silver flask. His eyes avoided mine, darting around the rustic cabin. "I'll hang back here, get the fire going, prep dinner. My knee is acting up anyway." Of course he was staying behind. Plausible deniability. He would be safe, warm, and drinking bourbon while I was supposedly out in the elements, navigating by a poisoned compass. "Sounds like a plan," I said, strapping on my snowshoes and shouldering my rifle. I slipped the gifted GPS into my parka pocket. "I'll be back before nightfall." He looked at me then. He really looked at me. For a fraction of a second, I searched his eyes for a flicker of hesitation. A hint of guilt, a sudden plea for me to stay inside. I was looking for the little boy who used to hold my hand when we walked across the ice. There was nothing there, just the cold, calculated stare of a man waiting for a paycheck. "Good luck, Dad," he said. I walked out into the encroaching white. Within 2 miles, the cabin disappeared completely behind a veil of falling snow. The temperature plummeted to 10 below zero. I pulled out my old, reliable magnetic compass and a physical topographical map, navigating by the ridges and the wind direction, the way I had for 4 decades. Then, I turned on Julian's GPS. The screen lit up, acquiring satellites. I set a waypoint for the cabin and started walking. I watched the digital arrow. According to the screen, the cabin was due north. But my magnetic compass and the terrain told me true north was a solid 40 degrees to the east. I followed the GPS's false bearing just to see where it led. It took me a mile off the main trail, leading me straight toward the edge of the jagged limestone ravines that cut through the valley. It was locally known as the Dead Zone, an area notorious for localized avalanches, deep crevasses, and zero natural shelter. If the whiteout hit while I was down there, the wind chill would drop to -40. A man wouldn't last 3 hours. He wanted the mountain to do his dirty work. I stood at the edge of the ravine, the wind whipping ice crystals against my goggles. The betrayal felt heavier than the pack on my back. I had fed him, clothed him, paid for his out-of-state college tuition, bailed him out of jail when he got a DUI at 22. I had loved him as if he were my own flesh and blood. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the sabotage GPS, and hurled it into the abyss. It vanished into the swirling white. The blizzard hit an hour later. It was a total whiteout, a screaming wall of snow that erased the sky and the earth. I didn't head back to the cabin. I found a natural rock overhang I knew from previous expeditions, built a deep snow cave, insulated it with spruce boughs, and settled in. I had enough dried rations and propane to last a week. I sat in the dark, listening to the wind howl, and let Julian sit in the cabin, believing he had just murdered his father. I stayed out there for 3 days and 3 nights. By the 4th morning, the storm broke, leaving a blindingly pristine world of fresh, deep snow and piercing blue skies. I packed my gear. On my way back, I tracked a large timber wolf that had been trailing a wounded caribou. I didn't shoot the wolf, but I found the fresh caribou carcass it had left behind. I harvested a large section of the meat, wrapped it in canvas, and hauled it on my sled. I needed to look like I had been busy surviving. It took me 4 hours to hike back to the cabin. As I crested the final ridge, I saw the flashing lights. An Alaska State Trooper's helicopter was grounded on the frozen lake near the cabin. 2 rangers on snowmobiles were idling near the porch. Julian was standing on the wooden deck, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket, talking to a state trooper with a notepad. He was holding his face in his hands, shaking his head. He was playing the role of the devastated, grieving son perfectly. I stepped out of the tree line and walked across the clearing, the sled scraping heavily behind me in the snow. One of the rangers spotted me and shouted. The trooper turned. Julian dropped his hands from his face. "If I live to be 100, I will never forget the look on his face in that moment. It wasn't relief. It wasn't joy. It was sheer, unadulterated terror. He went paler than the snow beneath his boots. His knees physically buckled, and he had to grab the porch railing to stay standing. "Elias," the trooper called out, jogging toward me through the deep powder. "Jesus, man. We were just organizing a grid search. Your boy here called it in yesterday on the satellite phone. Said you went out right before the storm and never came back." "Is that what he said?" I kept my eyes locked on Julian as I approached the porch. I told him I was tracking a herd. Got caught in the whiteout. So I dug a snow cave and waited it out. Harvested some fresh meat, too. Julian was hyperventilating, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. "Dad, your GPS." "Oh, the GPS?" I stepped onto the porch, towering over him. The smell of his fear was palpable. "Funny thing about that device you bought me, Julian, I was checking the circuit boards before we left. Noticed a little aftermarket modification. Soldered to the antenna feed. A spoofer, designed to feed false coordinates directly into the dead zone." The trooper frowned, stopping in his tracks, looking back and forth between us. "A spoofer? Elias, are you saying the device was intentionally tampered with?" "Must have been a factory defect," I said, my voice dead calm. My eyes drilling holes into Julian's skull. Or maybe the guy who sold it to him was playing a sick joke. Either way, I tossed it in a ravine. Good thing I know how to use a real compass. I saw the exact moment Julian realized I knew everything. I hadn't just survived, I had dismantled his entire alibi. If I pushed the issue, the troopers would subpoena his financial records. They would track down the black market buyer of the spoofing chip. And they would build an attempted murder case that would put him in federal prison for 20 years. We flew back to Anchorage in suffocating silence. Julian didn't speak to the pilot, didn't look out the window. He just stared at his trembling hands. When we landed, I didn't take him home. I drove my truck straight to the downtown offices of my estate attorney. I told Julian to get out of the truck. We sat in a polished mahogany conference room. I instructed my lawyer to draft an irrevocable renunciation of inheritance. "Sign it," I told Julian, sliding the thick stack of legal papers across the table. "You forfeit any and all claims to my estate, the life insurance. The properties. Everything goes to a wildlife conservation trust. Effective immediately." He stared at the pen. "Dad, the Russians, they'll kill me. You should have thought about that before you tried to send me into a freezing gorge." I was desperate, he whispered, a tear finally sliding down his cheek. But it wasn't a tear for me. It was a tear of self-pity. I didn't want to do it, but I needed the money. "Sign the paper, Julian, or I walk across the street to the Anchorage Police Department and formally report the tampered navigation equipment with my lawyer present." His hand shook so violently he could barely hold the pen, but he signed it. Every page. Every initial. When it was done, I took the paperwork, turned my back on him, and walked out of the building. He didn't apologize. Not once. He didn't ask for forgiveness because he knew there was none left to give. I am an old man now, living alone in a very large, very quiet house on the edge of the wilderness. I hear rumors through the grapevine occasionally. Julian fled Alaska shortly after that day, running from the people he owed. Some say he is hiding in Mexico. Some say they caught up with him in a back alley in Seattle. I don't look into it. The woods taught me a long time ago that some things are meant to be left out in the cold. I survived the blizzard. I survived the trap. But every time I look at the empty chair across my dining table, I realize that the hardest part of surviving isn't the freezing temperatures or the wolves. It is knowing that the boy you raised would have gladly watched you freeze, just to warm his own hands.